El Chapo and the kids now adapt to the demand from the U.S. And so they're growing more opium. I was always hoping that they would come visit or they would do something that would increase my social marketing awareness without me dying in the process
Yeah.
or my family getting hurt.
Steve, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to talk about Caribbean Harvest, which is your book four in your current series, I believe, and to dig deep into your experience writing the book. We'll just get started right with the pitch.
Sure. So if you could imagine America's most relentless drug lord, El Chapo, is getting pressured in Mexico so hard that he decides that he's going to check and see if Cuba is a good place to grow opium. That's essentially the backstory of the book. He's looking to expand his empire, right? The Sinaloa cartel is multinational, but there's always other places to go, other places to grow crops. And he teams up with Cuban intelligence and their Chinese partners to start working this without the Cuban government knowing. My protagonist, Brigadier General Lance Beowulf, he's Crow Native by birth, and his wife Ellie Parker end up going to Cuba to try and drop a dime, as the saying goes, on El Chapo. They don't have to arrest him, right? It's a police state. That's not going to happen. But if they can get the government to see what he's doing, they'll arrest him and put him away, which would be a great win for America, right? And so they infiltrate Cuba. It's treacherous waters on the infill. It's burning sugarcane fields when they get there and soldiers everywhere. So they're navigating through this police state while they're trying to connect up with some CIA resources and eventually take down his plans for Cuba. And there's elements of the love story there. At one point, Lance has to, actually at multiple points, he's got to make decisions about, do I chase after El Chapo or do I save my wife, my friend, things like that is going on. And then the book continues, and they, well, I don't want to say any spoilers, but let's say, there'll be another book, right? Because they, it's a job. Drug cartels are a job that's never done. So I add elements of technology that they can use. It's not a techno thriller, but I add that, and I keep it fast paced. And if you like Vince Flynn, Brad Thor, Brad Taylor, Mark Greaney, I think you'll like my book.
Awesome, thank you. And where did this story idea come from?
Well, I do a lot of research, also known as going down the rabbit hole sometimes, and literally got onto cartels and fighting drug cartels, been part of my history. And so I'd gone down some rabbit holes about changing environmental aspects in Cuba. What's it like to, try and grow pot on ground for 30 years and chemicals issues and things like farming issues. And a lot of reports out in the last 10 years of the cartels changing their crops. They're still growing pot because it's still a big seller in the United States. But there was more and more conversion of those plots of land to poppies and opium because heroin and heroin derivatives had come further down, actually grown further up into the ecosystem of rich American users, drug users. And so they were seeing rapid growth, sort of stagnation with pot and marijuana and growth in heroin use. And so being good businessman, El Chapo and the kids now adapt to the demand from the US. And so they're growing more opium. So that was sort of the emphasis of that. And it's like, wow, Cuba's a cool place. Let's do this. It's like the East Germany of the Caribbean, right? Back in the day in the Cold War, right? It's a police state, things like that. So all elements which make it much harder for my protagonist, his wife, their small team, and the CIA assets to operate. So it's combines that kind of spy thriller and story in there.
And does this all build off of one, two, and three, or are your stories when you hit book four? Is this like a story all on its own compared to the one, two, three? Like, is it like a Jack Reacher where you can jump into any book really at any point and kind of get the idea, or is it like
That's how,
building up?
yeah, that's other than the three primary books, the third book I wrote, which is probably the first one people should read, is a novella called A Warrior's Path,
Okay.
and it's Lance from the time his father dies of a heroin overdose on the reservation until he's really in the middle of the fight as a military member working down in Colombia and South America, things like that. So yeah, they are standalones. They jump years, so it's not totally sequential, my stories.
Okay. And just going into your experience and how that impacted the book, you have military experience as a Green Beret, you have White House experience. How does all that impact the book and the authenticity that you're able to bring, which other authors not necessarily can because they don't know what it's like to actually be on the ground?
Yeah, it does help. I have to be careful not to get into giving you an info dump about how in the middle of August, and I'm sorry, get the seasons wrong since you're south of the equator, but that the jungle really sucks, and it'll rot the clothes off you if you're in the jungle too long. It's just crazy. So yeah, having that experience lets me add these little elements of authenticity without dumping on the user. And that goes all the way from interactions Lance Bearwolf has with the president to being out in the field.
Yeah, cool. Have you been to Cuba and dealt with like and know the cartel specific if you're allowed if you're allowed to say anything? Is there any like real life experience from that cartel side and the Cuba side that comes into the book?
Not in Cuba because I had still have a pretty high clearance and still doing consulting. So no, I'm not allowed to go to Cuba at this point. I have some friends that they're I talked with who had been in Cuba. Their security clearances lapsed. They're in commercial business now, that kind of thing. And so I did a lot of research so that I could portray Cuba uh, in an authentic way without once again overdoing it. So.
And research being some of those friends that whose clearances have dropped, so they're allowed to talk essentially. And research, what other kinds of research did you get to?
Well, certainly watching videos. I go to sites that like offer tours of Cuba. One of the easier ways to get into Cuba, if you're interested in going to Cuba, is to team up with a charity, oftentimes a religious charity that will go do work down there. And they can put you on a team that's going to go do work and get you into the country for a week or two, that kind of thing like that. So that I do everything from, State Department, economic research. The CIA has their country books. I just, yeah, I go all out for a couple of weeks and do a lot of research and use, six lines, six things from all that research.
Yeah.
It's a very steep funnel down to what you put in the book. So.
Yeah, yeah, the thousands of hours you might spend doing the research, and then the one line that gets in there that's very authentic, and maybe you hope people get it, how cool that is. But, yeah, you don't necessarily know. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Was there any point where you almost gave up on the book as you were writing? And this is book four, so you have a good amount of experience now, because generally by book four you have a good stride. And was there any point where you were going to give up on this?
No, there was a spot. I'm like, where? How am I gonna? I'm a plotter, by the way, and I have it pretty well plotted out. But I'll pants in the middle and change things. And oh yeah, that's cool. And then do this and do that, and weave the story together. And I was like, wow, how are we getting out of that? Let's see. But no, you're right. It took me from 1993 to 2019 to write my first book. So I had all that time back then. Now I write. Yeah, I didn't have any hesitation writing this book. It was a lot of fun. It was more like flow. Oh, wait a minute, I need to get up, stretch my legs, go work out. I had to get away from the computer. I was having that kind of fun writing this book.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a good
Yeah.
feeling to have when you're having that kind of fun. Was
Yes.
the plotting of it Like, do you go into like character? I saw on your website, so I guess you do go into like heavy character details where you're like breaking down individual characters and who they are as a person and their back history and things. Do you do all that prior to writing the book? Is it that extensive of an outline and a plot before you start writing, or is that something as you get to feel the voice of the story and the character, you build it then?
Well, yeah. So my characters carry through. It's my protagonist, his now wife, Ellie Parker. They carry through. El Chapo carries through. But that, like, I had to create a former Cuban intelligence colonel that is now doing intelligence for El Chapo. So I had to create a few people, and it used to be my first book. I did 2-page personality outlines, profiles. Now I'm more like the FBI. I've got 6 pages, 250 questions. If the son's here and this is happening, how are they going to respond? I get that deep so that I get to know them, and then I can put them on the page. And they might sometimes I go back to it. I'm like, wait a minute, did I just say she has green eyes instead of blue
Yeah.
eyes? Hazel, But yeah, so I like doing that because I like that profile creation is also fun,
Yeah.
and creating a character that has some of the traits you want and is needs to grow in other places, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a fun part of it. By this book and the book 5 that I'm editing, which will be an Ellie Parker focused book, I know the characters pretty well, and it's that frees me up to do the writing and get the story done.
Okay, so you don't find it harder instead, you find it easier instead of harder when there's an expectation of who this person is and a story arc each time, sort of like a character arc each time you write the story.
Yeah. I wanted to have Lance go from pure revenge in the first book, where his parents are killed, and he's thinking, I joke that my first book was so easy to write. What's he thinking? He's thinking about revenge. And then my mentor, I was lucky enough when I first started writing to get a mentorship with Jerry Jenkins, who wrote the Left Behind
Oh, cool.
Christian series,
Yeah.
and makes books about baseball, everything. Jerry, and he's a super good editor. And it's like, well, I don't want him to be perfect at the end of the book. I'll have no growth for him to have
Yeah.
in the second, third book. And so, it's if you're writing single books, you can do things a little bit differently than if you want to write a series. And I tip my hat to Brad Thor and Brad Taylor, Mark Greaney, right? They've got, Pike Logan, Harvath, The Gray Man, and they're 13, 14, 16, 20 books in and
Yeah.
still trying to make things happen that are interesting to their character. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
I heard a podcast with the Mark Greaney recently, and it was funny that he was talking about how his characters never really get older, even though he's written 13 books. He kind of ignores the question of how old they are, because you can't have like a 45-year-old operator in the field. But technically, if you follow
Yeah.
the age range, they're getting that old.
Oh yeah, yeah. By the time I hit 45, I was leading the team, not kicking the door down. So yeah, yeah.
So, sticking with characters, you made an interesting choice of changing. Not only do you have a lot of characters in this book and viewpoints, but you changed point of view from third person to first person. First person being, I guess you would say, your main character, although it does share a lot of the book with other characters, with Lance as the main character, and his being
Mhm.
first person voice versus the others that are third person. What made you make that decision?
It's Brad Taylor's fault. So he writes Pike Logan and the task force, his task force stories that way. And I thought it was first time I read it, it was jarring,
Yeah.
having read third person, and omnipotent, and I can never keep all those different versions of how they explain that straight. But I read that and I'm like, wow, this gives me the ability to really be inside of Lance's head and talk about what he's thinking and seeing and stuff like that. And so yeah, that's where that came about, and I enjoy it. A new series I'm working on now. I started off with the first draft that way, and they're like, "Yeah, no, go back to third." And it's like, oh, all the is becomes was, and you make the changes, but
Yeah.
and it can be a little bit of a mind shift because I'll find myself falling back into first person.
Exactly.
It's like, ah, darn it, I need to finish that up,
Yeah.
but. Yeah, so that was the impetus. I mean, like I said, it was discordant or whatever the term is. It just didn't feel right. And then I just all of a sudden it was like I broke through reading his books, and it was like, oh yeah, I like this. So that's why I attempted it, and the first two books are in third, and the novella and the fourth book are in first person. The next one for Ellie is going to be in third, just because that's what I'm writing the other series in. So I'm trying to keep my head in one place
Yeah.
so I don't use myself and have to do rewrites.
Yeah. What did your, assuming your book is edited professionally, did they come back to you and say why?
Well, yeah,
I've done that myself. I asked because I've done that myself with like one of my thrillers. I wrote like a couple scenes when he was in the machine essentially because it's kind of a tech based. Anyway, he's in the machine. I wrote first person. My first person. My editor came back and was like, "This is no. There's almost no reason to do this in first person. Stick with third person." So I got that pushback and went to third person for the whole book.
yeah. Well, I never got any pushback from my editors. What happened was I got a traditional deal. I got I got the advance, and I was all excited. And then 2 years later, my publisher was out of business. So great guy. He gave me all the rights back. One January, a couple years ago, I'm like, "What is KDP? Hello, help!" I'm trying to figure out how to make second editions of my first two books. Then I did the novella and this last book myself. My wife and I are Pratt and Media, and so I don't have, I've got full control,
Yeah.
editorial control, that kind of thing. But now that I'm writing another series for Wargate books, that's where I delivered a first person short story in an anthology first. And they're like, nah, everybody else is writing third. Do you mind doing this? I'm like, no, I don't care. If that's what you want, you're paying me to be in the book, to write that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Whatever you want's good for me. I'm not well established enough or well known enough to go, no, this is how I write. It's like, yeah, what you need, what you're expecting. So, yeah, so I did get pushback based on their readership and what they were expecting to do with
Okay.
my follow on to another series. So, and so I'm okay to do that. It's I just don't want to start writing first person again while I'm in the middle of doing third and have those brain cramps along the way.
Yeah. So when you wrote this one, did you write all third person point of view and then come back and fill in first, or did you just go back and did you write it like in the order that it was written, I guess?
Yeah, if it was a POV of somebody else other than Lance, it's going to be third. And I caught myself a couple times in there mixing it up, and all of a sudden, I had El Chapo or the Cuban intelligence officer talking in first person. It's like, okay, but not too bad. I'd say maybe 10% of the time. I catch myself before I had enough coffee for my brain to.
There.
Yeah, but yeah, so not bad at all. And once again, when I'm in that flow, it just flows because I know if it's a Lance POV, Lance Beowulf, that's going to be first person. Everybody else third. That way I'm not shifting around and going, okay, what did I do here and do there?
Yeah.
And because I'll take, not only will I outline, I love sticky notes. My wife has a wall, 1,600 cookbooks on a wall, and I use those bookcases to put like on the top level bookcase of the bookcase will be the Lance Beowulf thread. Down will be Ellie, then it'll be the antagonist and stuff like that. And so if I had to not only figure out the plot and the flow, then having to figure out who's in first and who's in third, I really explode my brain.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so good question though.
And how do you go? So this being book four, how do you decide how much information, and is this in your outline, how much information to bring readers up to speed? Because we assume that readers are going to read one to four, but it does happen that people pick up four, and we want to give them a reminder. Who knows how long it's been since they read, the others. How do you balance an info dump versus like little pieces at a time, and is that part of your outline?
Well, it's funny. I was just on a panel at BoucherCon on avoiding the info dump, And I'm a former IT guy, so I often call it the data dump. But yeah, what I said there is oftentimes I'll just write the data dump and then I'll just cut it up and put it to the side and hold on to it. And actually, it was a data dump on Lance's early years that actually became a 40,000 word novella. But once again, if you're a new writer out there, one of the best things you could do is find a book that you really like. You like that style of writing. You want to write in that style, not emulate, but write in that style. Buy the book and literally tear it into pieces and tear it apart. Don Bentley mentioned this one time, and I'm like, oh yeah. So I got one of Brad Taylor's books and took it all apart. And my wife's like, you just destroyed this $15 book. I'm like, yeah, but look at what I'm learning. And take it apart and learn from it that way. And how the, the bestseller folks, men and women, organize their books, their flow, their plot lines, things like that. And so, yeah, I I will plot, like I say, I will plot, but I will pants and get new ideas in between. I'm lucky that I've never considered when I do an outline, I don't consider it done until the book is done.
Yeah.
Because right, I might have a spark. Usually the spark comes from external. I'll read something else and be like, oh no, I need to do this, that. And then it changes the whole, it changes the downstream book in some way. And so being flexible like that just makes it, I never get upset, distraught. It's like, yeah, okay, we'll figure this out.
Yeah.
Just keep moving forward. And yeah, that's worked for me.
Have you made any big changes in this book as a result of pantsing a section and then realizing, oh, maybe this is what I'd rather have Lance do than what I had planned, and now the whole like chunk of a story has been shifted?
Well, yeah, and once again, I was looking around, I was doing research, and so a lot of Caribbean harvest takes place in Santiago de Cuba, which is at the southern end, you might call it at the other end of the island from Havana, right? And there's a big, beautiful bay, and I'm like, how am I going to get Lance down in that area and into a safe house? How are the CIA assets going to get him there? And I researched and I found out, number one, that like Cuba is got a really old power generation system, electrical system, and they actually lease boats, Turkish-made boats that actually have generators on them and sit them in the harbor. I'm like, okay, that's nice, but I'm not going to have Lance hide in one of those boats. That doesn't really help. And then I found out that one of the more profitable businesses, if you can call it profitable, because being a communist state, there's not really that idea in theory, that there's cement plants that make cement, and then there are plants that make the products, like our dividers we have here our highway dividers, things like that we have here in America. And I've connected a cement plant with a product plant that was at the top of Santiago Cuba Bay next to a warehouse. And that warehouse became their warehouse where they were moving things with a narco sub. So it just, one of those kind of research things. Oh, good. Well, the CIA asset, his real life is owning some concrete plants around Cuba, which gives him the ability to travel, move, right, take Lance and Ellie covertly to different places. So it's that kind of cascading, do research, little idea how that works for the CIA asset kind of idea, and it fit right into the story. And yeah, as you probably notice, I think I'll criticize myself a little bit here. I think my prologue in the book with the purchase of the sub is a little too ambiguous at the start, but people
Yeah.
people get it. Like,
Oh yeah.
people get it.
Yeah. 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 For sure. Yeah. And El Chapo it was an interesting that because in my research after I realized that he's a real person, because I thought this is fiction, and that was a really interesting thing to do, because I mean I'll consider whether or not I even want to use a business name, because if I say something about the business name that isn't true, or I could say something wrong about a business name, you're like, oh, I get the lawsuits or whatever because you said they did this or did that. So you choosing to use El Chapo as a character when he's actually a real person is very interesting. How did that all play out?
Well, it's worked so well so far, and I was always hoping that they would come visit or they would do something that would increase my social marketing awareness,
That's a great idea.
without me dying in the process,
Yeah.
or my family getting hurt. But yeah, by the time in 2019 that I started to write, we were on the hunt again. We were trying to put him back into prison, things like that. And then, of course, now that he's in the Florence Supermax prison here in Colorado, Florence, Colorado, I joke that I want to go see him, but they won't let me talk to him. Unfortunately, I get him to sign a book.
Yeah.
But yeah, the inciting incident for the story of the very first book took place in Mexico and involved the Sinaloa cartel in my family. So that went a long ways to, well, my first book I wrote helped me exercise some demons, exercise, push ups, demons, like
Yeah.
do some excise. I wish I knew the English language. The excise some demons about the event and things like that. And so I've carried on with it. The Chapalitos, his sons, and other people haven't. In the grand scheme of things, I'm a nobody. They
Yeah.
got bigger
Okay.
fish to fry. Things.
Yeah.
Now they got Delta and SEAL Team 6 breathing down their necks. So
Yeah.
that's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very unique take. It's enjoyable. And when I found out about El Chapo being real, it almost brought the story even more to life. I hope people listen to this podcast and then go and read the book, because when you get the context of everything that's gone into this and your experience, it even brings the book more to life than you might just passively reading it too.
No, thank you. Thank you. I will tell folks too that the technology I used in the book, my very first book I set way back in 1998. And so I've been able to leapfrog some technology and get closer to today. But yeah, everything I put in the book is technology we used, I have used, and or could be used, against in the fight against the drug cartels, and then there's a whole bunch of other things that still haven't had clearance I can't talk about. The DoD review board would never let it go out in the book. So, yeah.
Awesome. So we are going to wrap up with a couple more questions for people listening who are authors. And what advice would you give to someone who just published their first or second book?
Wow. Number one, keep writing. Number two, we don't get a choice today. We need to be on social media. Try and conquer your fear about talking about your book too much and those kinds of things. But to really get onto social media, one of the best things I did, and it was advice from Jeff Wilson of Andrews and Wilson, who write the Sons of Valor and a bunch of other great, best-selling series, was create a community, create a tribe, a team, find other like authors in your genre, get into critique groups. Those kind of things not only will help you with your craft, but also give you connections to other people maybe who have already, have done indie things that you haven't, or traditionally published and know agents and things like that. So networking, I was pleasantly surprised, having been used to it in the civilian side. Networking really plays a big role, and like I say, will help you with your craft, your social media, your awareness of your books, those kind of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, absolutely. Community is ever more important, especially when you have your own imprint or you're an indie author. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Where can people find your books and hear more about you?
Sure. My books are for sale on Ingram Spark and via their distributors and Amazon. And my website is www.steven, Steven, Stratton, Stratton, USA.com. I should have made that shorter. Yes.
I will link to
But
it in the
Steven's,
show notes. So all you have to do is
yeah,
click.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, yeah. I'm also Stratton Books on X, and Steven Stratton on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm like most authors, I'm still trying to figure out Instagram. Have a good friend, Tracy Abramson. She's a pro at it, so I keep stalking her and getting advice and things like that. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate this. It was just a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. And if you don't mind sticking around for a few questions after the show for the after show for our Patreon subscribers, just a few more questions there. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.